Hello, and welcome to FHIR Subscriptions Part 3. My name is Gino Canessa, and in this video we're going to take a walkthrough of the reference implementation so that you can see how to use it to test either servers or clients. Both are supported. In the previous videos we went through a high-level overview of FHIR subscriptions and then a more detailed walkthrough of the backport implementation guide and new resources in R4B. So this is the next step here, and then after this we'll hopefully be able to jump into some coding tutorials so we can kind of see how to use FHIR subscriptions in your own code. So with that said, let's jump right in. Here I am at the reference implementation that's hosted nicely by Microsoft. The subscriptions.argo.run page is where you'll want to access it, and it has links to everything else. I'm actually going to jump down there. When you bring this page up, this is just a React application in TypeScript, but you can see there are links to all of the GitHub pages. There they are for all this software. So there's three components. This UI that you're using, and it's written in TypeScript and using React. There's this host bridge piece, and that one is just to, as we've discussed before, a web page is not able to set up a REST endpoint, and so that's a service that just does that. It just sets up a REST endpoint and communicates with this client actually via Websockets, so that it can transfer the notifications to the client software. And then this third piece is the server proxy. So it's just a relatively thin layer of what sits on top of a standard FHIR server and intercepts the things it needs. So the obvious ones are things like subscription and subscription topic, that it just grabs those and never forwards them on. But then it also, for instance, we're using the encounter topic here. So it intercepts encounters, sends them onto the server, but then grabs a copy and does the processing it needs. There are a lot of other links here. Some of them I skipped over up here. Obviously, there's feedback. Feel free, but there's the this document here is a guide to the software in a little bit more detail. I thought that had been updated, but apparently I missed one of these spots. But this goes through and talks about all of the different pieces of the software. Probably not even quite as much depth as we're going to get into in this video, but that's there in case you want to see something. It does have links to the current CI builds of different things, and then links to all of the Connectathons where this software has been used, starting all the way back in September of 2019. There are links there, and especially as you look towards coming up to Connectathon 28, all that information can be found there. Perfect. So with that out of the way, since that's kind of the preface, we can look at the actual application. It's pretty standard. There's a navigation tab here at the top. This is showing our connection status. Right now they are gray because we are not connected. The configuration pieces here, I'll highlight that this group of things is actually repeated twice. It kind of runs off the bottom of the screen there right now, but it has the configuration for the R4 server and the configuration for the R5 server, so that you can test one or the other endpoints. That's controlled via a switch down here, a toggle, so that you can see whether it's using the R4 or the R5 version. In this Connectathon, we're focusing on R4. All of the R5 things are here, but for our purposes, we'll be testing R4. That said, if you have your own server implementation, you can just put that URL here and do it. All of the FHIR calls, all of the searching for a patient, creating an encounter, creating a subscription, all that happen in the UI directly. So you can even put in things like localhost here, and that'll work because it's just running from the web browser. An auth header, again, we don't need it on this server, but if your server does require one, here's how you put it. Note that this is the contents of the auth header, not authorization, not the key value pair, but just the value. And then the last drop down here is the return preference, minimal representation or operation outcome. I generally use representation for everything, but if your server functions a certain way, you can do that, or if your clients typically operate in a certain way, you can test all those things. As I mentioned, the next group is the exact same configuration, but for an R5 endpoint. We aren't interested in that right now, and I could probably simplify that since you can really only use one or the other. But in the UI, you can test both and switch back and forth. All right, the last text box here is the client host URL, and that is the thing I was talking about, that bridge in order to stand up REST endpoints and then send the notifications to the clients. Generally speaking, you'll never need to change this. The only time you would is if you are running all of these pieces yourself. If you want to run them in your own network, on your laptop, you're disconnected from the network, you can grab those GitHub projects. We have the Docker file definitions there, all that kind of stuff. So if you were doing that, then obviously you would change this URL. Otherwise, there's really no point. The toggles down here, I'll just go through them one by one. The first one is whether you're using R4 or R5. I can probably update that to be a little clearer, but for right now, that is how you set that. Displaying these client host messages, when we do different things, a little notification overlay pops up briefly. If you want every notification from the server, specifically if you're doing like the actual subscription notifications coming in, if you want those to pop up, then you can turn that on. They show in the UI in other places, so I typically leave it off. Same thing if you want those to show up in the developer tools console, the JavaScript console, the F12 console for people who are used to that, then you can turn that on. But again, they're displayed in the UI. Theming, skinning, and then the last one of interest is the skipping the server capabilities check. So when we click the connect button, in this case, we're using the R4 things. So we're going to connect to both the FHIR server and the client host. And the UI here, the client, is actually going to check the metadata, the capabilities endpoint, to see if the server supports subscriptions, if it supports subscription topic, if it has patient encounter, some of those types of things. Overall, it's good practice, so we want to leave it in. But especially when you're starting your implementation, you'll add those things, but not have the capability statement updated necessarily. So you can skip checking and it'll just blindly say, well, I assume you support this. So we'll connect, and here you could see one of those toasters that popped up for a second there. And that is exactly the kind of messages we see, but it just disappeared. Perfect. Now that we're connected, we can also see that we have nice blue approval signs here saying that we are connected to the server and the client host. So let's walk through these tabs. The first one here is the patient REST scenario. So this is kind of the scenario one in the Connectathon documentation. I do have a more detailed write-up here as well. And this goes through, it's a single patient encounter notification via REST hook, for example, to a consumer app, outlining what the scenario actually wants you to do. You can look at the workflow diagram so that you can see how all these things are supposed to interact with each other, or the simplify diagram, which is far simpler, but for some reason doesn't show up as nicely for the first time. So that kind of walks you through what you're doing, and then it has all the steps here, what you need as a client, what you need as a server, what you need to do the trigger. All of those things are kind of spelled out in much more detail there. So we're going to walk through those steps. Generally speaking, the UI here, we're using these this kind of card style interface. So you can see there's different cards for different things. You can collapse or expand them. Ones that are available to you, we can see we have the option of doing these things, whereas this we can't do yet. because we haven't done the steps before and we need those steps in order to get to this step. And then some of these steps are optional, which is to say you can just kind of do them whenever you want. So in this case, we're going to get a subscription topic list. And we just click the button that was available, and it added all of this content down here. And this is just another kind of tab style interface to have all these different pieces. So you can see the URL that we issued the request on. So this is subscriptions.argo.run/r4/subscription topic. We were just asking for all of the subscription topic resources that were there. We didn't post any data, so there's nothing for that. But we can see the response. And in this case, we are using JSON. We're pretty much using JSON always through here, FHIR JSON. But you can see here's the actual bundle it returned. It's a search set with one entry and has a subscription topic resource. We're in R4, so this is the R4B version of the subscription topic. And if you want it, you can also just copy to clipboard. That button will copy whatever is in the pane here displayed. Since that's a lot of information to actually process, where applicable, we put these nice info kind of shorter versions so that you can see what's interesting. All right, well, now that we have a topic, we can go ahead and find or create a patient. In this case, we can just use an existing patient. The server doesn't have many loaded right now, which is by design, but we'll use our testy McTestface because that's fun. And we can see the same things here. We, did a patient search. We have a bundle that came back with 2 results, et cetera, et cetera. Once I clicked use that patient, it just changed the info. In this case, this step that's completed already, it happened automatically. As soon as we selected a patient, the UI said, oh, we're far enough along that we can create our REST endpoint. Obviously, if you're designing your own client, you would have to take care of that step yourself. But in this case, there was really nothing to do, so it just automatically ran it. So the next step we have is to create a subscription. Again, we're in this very guided scenario, so it's going to use the patient we selected earlier on, and the only real options we have are whether we want empty ID only or full resource, and whether we want any additional headers. So again, in the case of we're exposing this just in case you're running through this on your own server, but in our case, we don't need any here. So when we create the subscription, we can see a lot happened here, and then it actually went and the next step already happened as well. So same thing, we can see all we did was subscriptions, our server.subscriptions.argo.run, the R4 endpoints subscription, we actually posted. I should probably add something that says what method was used, but that's not there today. In this case, what we requested was here, so we can tell it was a post because we had all this request data. And you can see this is a subscription, and it's an R4 style subscription with the extensions here so that we can see things like ID only. We can see on the REST hook the heartbeat period, max counts, all these different things that we use in conformance with the R4 backport IG. And then we can see the response data that came back from the server as well. There is an additional button here on the subscription to get status, and that'll just overwrite this, but it's just to go and get the status. So we can see the initial request came back with requested, and in theory, if I hit get status, yes, now we can see that it is active. Because as soon as we created it, it went and did the handshake. And what it actually received is this history bundle. Again, we're in an R4 backport IG style. And so we can see that there is a subscription status. The status of the subscription was requested at the time of the handshake. It had 0 events up till then, and 0 are in this notification. And this is just the standard history bundle that has all the pieces you need. But again, that's a lot to look at, so you can just see that we got a handshake and it was requested at the time. So following our guided scenario here, the next thing we can do is post an encounter. Same thing. We're not in this UI. We're not trying to do every possible option you can have in an encounter. And really, we found just having the encounter class and the encounter status are all you need. But in this case, the encounter status has to be in progress in order to trigger the subscription. So really, the only thing you pick is the encounter class. And that was just so that there was some differentiation if you are getting confused with many people using the server at the same time on the same patient or things like that. So once we send an encounter, we can see same thing. We posted an encounter, got back the results, and we can see that we did receive a notification. If we want to see the whole bundle, we can see that. And in this case, this is using some of the new features we want to be testing at Connectathon 28. So we can see that it has, for instance, this notification event structure that's inside the subscription status. And we can see that there was any, oops, I gotta hit control when I do that. When we were in event 1, we have a focus of the encounter, and we have an additional context of a patient. And so as we look through the bundle, we can then see we do have an encounter and we do have a patient. We're an ID only, so there's not much more info than that there. I'll note here, we can go and, for instance, send another encounter. So now we have 3 encounters. If you want to look through them, you can look through them manually, but otherwise it just stays on latest so that you can see what was there. Another feature that we want to really test here at the Connectathon is this events operation that we've added. And the implementation we have here actually allows you to specify the content hint that you would like. Again, the concept behind that is saying, if I'm replaying events and getting that information from the server, I'm already authenticated. So in this case, I had an ID only notification. So all I have was the ID of the encounter and the ID of the patient. But if I go and ask for that event back again, the next thing I'm going to do is ask you for that encounter and that patient. And so instead of making you do 2 round trips and making the server process everything twice, you can specify this content hint. Implementation of this operation is optional. And then even supporting this feature is optional within that. So this isn't a guarantee that the server can do it, but I believe it's pretty nice when it does. So in this case, you can see that we got back a history bundle. This looks just like the notifications, except we can see the type is query event. So that was recently added. And we can see that this has 3 events in this notification. And same thing, we have this notification event structure, and that breaks up event 1, event 2, and event 3 is pretty much off the screen. But here we can see that there's the focus for each encounter, but they all have the same patient as the reference for the additional context. So in our bundle, we'll see we have the first encounter, the patient that was added, and then the other encounters. And since we gave the full resource content hint, it actually has the full resources in this bundle. So that is kind of the first scenario and kind of walking through and showing how things work. Because of that, I'll skip over the second scenario, which is just doing the same thing, but with groups of patients. So in FHIR, there's the group resource, which is what you can do to define like a cohort of patients for a study. You can define an insurance group to say that this is a particular payer, and these are all of their members that I have as patients, different things like that. And so you can run through and do the same thing, but instead of having a single patient, you can have 5 patients in the group or 10 patients in the group and things like that. So that's for that. Now the next part here is actually the playground. And so this is where you can do additional testing for all kinds of things. So again, same cards that we have. There's notifications, there's the events operation. We do need to go and grab some subscription topics to turn on most of these features. But we have, just specific callouts for the different things we want to do. So for instance, here in the subscription one, since we only have one topic on the server, that is the only topic we have available. But we can see we have all kinds of channel types. So REST hooks are the internal, our defined REST hooks. So if we create a REST endpoint, you can see here that it added that endpoint here. We can actually turn it on and off so that you can simulate missing events and things like that, and even delete it. You can do an external REST hook. And so this is if you have your own endpoint that you want to be sending notifications to, you can just type, http://example.org, your endpoint goes here. And so you can just fill that out and then it will send the notifications there. Obviously, they will not show up in the UI up here if you're sending them to your own endpoint. So just to keep that in mind. Email is pretty self-explanatory. You put in an email address and it will send you emails. And you want to make sure that, like here, we cannot send them to mailinator.com. So if you're just using a fake email just for testing, you can try getnada.com and you can take a look and kind of see those emails as they come through. And then as a note, these are coming from subscriptions@genoc.org because that is the email address that I have registered for it. And same thing, you can see, you have different types of emails you can do, the payload contents, and all the normal stuff on the subscription. Another fun one is WebSockets. So as you create these, you can connect to the WebSocket here. This is pulled from the capability statement when we connected initially, but you can connect here and get the notifications. And then you can actually send notifications to Zulip now. I defined a custom channel. I haven't written up the IG for it yet, just because of time. Hopefully I will before the Connectathon, so if other people want to try implementing it, you can. But essentially in the UI, you just put your user ID, and then you get these notifications from the subscriptions RI notification bot, reference implementation bot. And you can see that it does these handshake notifications first, the idea being that you can opt out. I have not put that functionality in yet. And then you have different notifications of different types. So for instance, here, this is a full resource notification. And better would be to make it as an attachment, but I have not implemented that yet. So you can see you can grab the full resource from here. But there's the whole thing you can see, and it just pings you on every event. So it kind of gives an example of the kinds of things we can do with custom channels and etc. So again, same thing here. We'll go ahead and actually connect with WebSockets just so we can see. So we need to create a filter, or we can not have a filter, but in this case, I want patient 1. You can search and go through and do all these things here, but in our case, I know that it's patient 1. You can add filters, so you can make multiple filters, especially as we add more subscription topics. Right here, it doesn't have too much use. So in this case, I'll click Create, and you can see that we have a subscription just like we did in the other things. In this case, I'm going to connect the WebSocket and bind to that subscription. Let us know that we did. And we'll go ahead and pick patient 1 to send an encounter for. And we should, there we go. Oh, we should have received a notification, as long as I had my filter and everything correct. So, yeah. And then we can disconnect the WebSocket. I don't think there's any real cleanup steps here other than you can do things like deleting your subscription. We can go and, create a new REST endpoint and do the same thing. And quick create the subscription. And same thing as we send encounters. Then we see notifications up here. And then we can also go and requery events and all those kinds of things on the different subscriptions. So there you go. We'll go ahead and delete our endpoints and our subscriptions so that we leave things kind of cleaned up on the server. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments on the reference implementation, please feel free to ask. I'm on Zulip. I'm on all the time. Obviously, these projects are on GitHub, so you can file issues there if you run into things. These are under constant active development, just to keep that in mind. Since these I try to keep up to date with whatever we're testing in the specifications. But they're generally speaking up all the time. So you can test these kind of at your convenience, at your leisure, and kind of work on whatever you need to. So other than that, thanks again for watching. Hope to see everyone at the Connectathon. In the next videos, I haven't decided yet whether we'll do some code tours of the code behind all these things we just did, or if we will jump into doing some coding ourselves, but I will be deciding that shortly. So thanks again, and cheers.